and welcome to Secular Sexuality, the ACA show that wants to hear your voice loud and proud. I'm Christy Powell. My co-host with the big mouth tonight is, of course, V. La Bianca. Joining us again is Texas queer counselor Billie Beard, here to lend her voice to our conversation on safe vocal feminization and the pitfalls of passing in a heteronormative culture. Billie, thanks for being here.
Thank you, Christy and V. I'm really glad to be back here. It's a little weird because last time I was in the studio and now I don't get to interact with you and your wonderful crew.
For sure. It
At
is
least not in
our
person,
loss.
anyway.
And
so I'm not sure what all we need to do as far as with...
Oh, sorry about that. I was muted to keep the...
I'm sorry. I think I've been in and out a little bit.
We're having a little bit of tech issues tonight.
Consummate professionals. How are you doing, V?
Oh my God. I'm doing good. I think I'm lagging just a little bit. So if I'm a little off sync, apologies there. You guys, we're going to have a really good show tonight. I'm super excited about this episode because this is a topic that I've thought a lot about, and I am super down to start learning some background and some techniques I think we're going to dive into as well. So if you're interested in what we're going to be talking about today, which is transgender voice therapy, you can call the show at 512-991 9242 or call tiny.cc/callsex. Use your computer for that, toll free across the board, no matter where you are. Also, a quick reminder that today is the last day to submit your mailbag episode question that we're going to be pre-recording this Saturday. So be sure to send your emails to sex@atheist-community.org if you want to be included in that.
All right. Well, let's go ahead and jump in. Billie, before we get into like the what or the how, let's look at why. Why do some trans folks go through voice therapy?
The short answer is just trying to get comfortable and be safe in and around the world, honestly. Let's face it, I mean, in an ideal situation, you'd be able to, no matter how deep or pitch your voice was, nobody would think anything of it, and you'd just be able to accept what their gender is right out of the gate. But unfortunately, that's not the case.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I mean, we're increasingly seeking to live in a world where a particular height or look or, how husky or masculine or soft or feminine your voice isn't bound to or critical to a particular gender. So why does this kind of thing matter? Why are people looking to change these pieces of themselves?
Yeah, I mean, it's one of those things that there's... our voice you kind of have an image whenever you hear of your voice. And if you're a trans man, you have this, you've heard your voice pre-testosterone for so long, and it kind of just links together with that gender dysphoria on your body. And then if you're a trans woman, it's like you hear this and you just hear this guy and it's just constantly in your head, and you want to kind of allow yourself to be able to step away from that situation and be able to kind of go down a different path, a different way of being seen through the world. Sure.
Well, what is the difference, I guess, between like avoiding gender dysphoria and just trying to pass, or is there one? Does that difference even matter?
Let's see here. I think they're tied together. I'm not the biggest fan of the term passing. I tend to, but also then it's like, what kind of word can you really use to describe it when it's just like, I guess blending is about as close as I can get, because passing implies like failure. Like, okay, if somebody can pass, somebody can fail. But if you can kind of blend into society where it's like, okay, there's variation, there's a little bit more of a kind of a ebb and flow of what that could look like. So I tend to go with more of kind of blending in as far as that's concerned. But I also don't want it to be construed with as conform to either, which I think a lot of people would kind of go with the blending.
Yeah, no, I like that distinction. That this idea that people have the right to want to fit in, but that it's not a pass or fail test. There's not a expectation or an
Hmm.
obligation to do so. So we've talked about
Absolutely.
Well, we've talked about binding on the show, on how chest
Hmm.
binding can be really affirming for trans men and for some NB folks, and that there are some dangers to it. There's a lot of that same kind of concerns mixed up around, like, why should we have to change our bodies or whatever to fit into society, while also wanting to make space for people to look and feel like their natural selves. Does that feel like a fair
Hmm.
corollary here?
Yeah, I think the good thing is with voice, it's not the damage risk is not as severe as improper binding. The good thing is that if you push your voice too much, you can usually rest it and allow it to heal. You can learn new techniques to kind of allow your voice to not be pushed so hard. There's different ways of kind of allowing that. If you did happen to push it too hard, that you can typically recover. While I know with binding, if you're using like ace bandages, it can actually cause you to suffocate. And so, I mean, there's a lot are cause bone damage as well. So, I mean, it's a little bit less severe, but there is some risk of if you overexert your voice, you can cause polyps and growths that will come in that can actually change your voice and typically will make it kind of can make it sound deeper. Think of like these nodules, or if you've ever interacted with smokes like 2 or 3 packs a day for like 20 years and you hear that voice, that's what those nodules voices will give you, this real deep raspy kind of voice. And I don't think anybody really wants that kind of coming out of them, whether as male or female, or
Sure.
somewhere in between.
Well, so it sounds like there are some risks to vocal feminization, which I guess we can demystify or declinicalize that term a little bit by just describing it as a person who is seeking to maybe raise or soften their voice to make it appear more feminine.
Mm-hmm.
It sounds like there are some risks to doing that, but maybe with effective coaching and training, there are ways to avoid that or mitigate that. Do I have it right at all?
Yeah, exactly. It's just like it's the same thing with singers. Like singers that abuse their voice or don't treat their voice well can have real kind of vocal cord problems. So there was I remember seeing on, I can't even remember where, but it was I don't know if you're familiar with Henry Rollins on Black Flag.
Sure.
He had to go to an ENT specialist because he had messed up his voice so bad. And this particular doctor worked primarily with vocalists and singers. And he ended up saying that it was the second worst vocal cords he's ever seen in his entire life because he had abused his voice so much over the years. And he was like, and basically the doctor was surprised, like, what do you mean you don't drink? What do you mean you don't do drugs? Because it was just so terrible, where it was just like, it was inflamed, it was red, there was nodules all over the place. It just looked awful from everything that it was ever described of.
Yeah, well, I mean, it sounds
so
very
he's just
West
like,
Coast punk, but not necessarily like the healthiest and happiest way of existing.
Exactly. So I mean, it's not just trans people that experience this problem. There's a lot of people that use their voice incorrectly. Cheerleaders do it. Drill instructors do abuse their voice too much. So it's not just for trans people, it's also cis people too.
Well, it seems to me like a lot of these conversations around the different things that trans people do in order to make themselves feel more like themselves, none of it is unique necessarily to trans people. And yet there's this stigma around pursuing things in any category if you are trans. So like I went to
Sure.
a vocal coach before I came out, even to myself, because I was like, I don't really like my voice. I want to change it. I want to adjust it. And I didn't have any kind of gender ties to that. If I went to somebody who was specializing in that for trans people, I think that would be met very differently than, oh, you know, V just wants to be more professional in the way that they talk. And the same with, you know, any kind of you know, body surgeries or hormones or binding, like they are all things that everybody does for various reasons, and it's pathologized only in certain circumstances, which feels weird to me.
No, that's fair. If you applied like the WPATH standards for top surgery, for instance, to any like cishet woman that wanted to pursue breast augmentation or reduction or whatever else, it'd be an entirely different conversation. And I think that's really worthwhile to highlight here.
And I guess I had another question for you, Billie, about the
Absolutely. I think. Oh yeah, absolutely.
sorry, go ahead with a little bit of a lag.
I'm sorry. Oh, yeah, that lag is getting me. No, you go ahead.
All right. So what I was going to ask is a little bit of clarification about kind of what you bring to the table in terms of voice coaching, and if there is a very specific kind of person you would look for this, or is anybody who specializes in voice coaching also qualified to do this, or is this a subsection that people would need to look specifically for if they wanted it?
Yeah, I think ideally you would want a speech pathologist that specializes with working with trans people. There's even, because most of the time it focuses on vocal feminization, but then there's also some that there's also some trans men that are on it too, just to kind of help get their voice a little bit lower, or kind of follow the speech patterns a bit closer to the typical male in whichever culture they happen to live in as well. And ideally, that's what I would say is, but the problem is, I know for a lot of trans people, that's just not an option because of financial restrictions.
Sure. Yeah, it's really worth noting that this is not something that's going to be covered by Medicare, Medicaid, and you know, just with the nature of health insurance and really healthcare in this country, it's not something a lot of folks have access to. So I definitely want to get into it with you about what some of the perhaps DIY solutions look like, and maybe what some of the dangers and things to be aware of there are. But before we do, I'd love for V to pull up a caller for us.